Alright, hey everybody. I just wanted to finish up the discussion today about Knoblauch. And I was going to type it out, but I'd rather write it on the board and talk to you that way, I guess. So we already talked about functional literacy, how that's more focused on literacy for everyday everyday use, rather than, so the example Knoblauch gives is that a soldier would be able to fire a missile or learn how to fire a missile. We talked about this today, but not be able to question, why the missile was being shot or fired. So I wanted to move on to kind of cultural literacy. We talked about it briefly. I don't think we got all the way through. Cultural literacy is teaching to preserve a culture. This is how Knoblauch explains it. Cultural literacy is teaching to preserve a culture, a single culture or heritage, the dominant culture or heritage in whatever country. And we talked a little bit about the Western canon, which, if you remember, it's I think it's the 26 major authors that are considered classic. That's what you hear when you hear classic works. That's what people talk about in the Western world, which is Europe and North America. So yeah, but one problem with that is that, or one problem that people have with that is that they see it as a bunch of old dead white guys, and there's not a lot of representation there. So that's only one perspective, which kind of people talk about cultural literacy, talk about that's one of the issues they have, is that it's only promoting that one perspective. So yeah, advocates of cultural literacy think that teaching other cultures causes the denigrating of primary cultures, how Knoblauch words it. All that means is that they see it as a threat to the dominant culture, if that makes sense. Hope that makes sense. So this and functional literacy, cultural and functional literacy, preserve the world as is. They allow whoever is in power to kind of perpetuate things, to keep things rolling as is, without any change or threat to the status quo. And then one term I wanted to just talk about, jingoistic protectionism, because it sounds like it's a big cocktail party phrase. But that's just nationalism with an aggressive or belligerent foreign policy. And nationalism is just being attached to one nation. So yeah, extreme pride in that nation, I guess, which ties into that dominant culture again, and yeah, with an aggressive or belligerent foreign policy. So the foreign policy of eliminating or oppressing or controlling anyone or any nation that is kind of a threat to that dominant culture or that nation, that dominant nation. So then personal growth literacy, which is kind of harder to find actually. It's not as explicitly stated, but it is in the middle of the paragraph on the bottom paragraph on page 5. Where does it start? Preserve and advance the world as is. About line 146, the liberal argument, for instance, emphasizes literacy for personal growth. So I want to talk about that a little bit. The advocates of personal growth say that students should write and think creatively. And this is more of a, I don't want to use not the term hippie, but that's what people think of when they think of kind of a hippie, more individual empowerment. So yeah, the learning engages the students. So an example would be, personal growth curriculum would be if people or students were allowed to choose their own books instead of being assigned novels, most likely from the Western canon, or when you hear classic literature, that's what people are talking about. So yeah, learning engages students. Expressionism rather than conformity, and expressionism is just the ability or the being allowed to express oneself rather than conforming. And conformity, you're sitting on a computer, so you could probably Google it. But conformity is just kind of falling in line with how everyone else is doing it, or conforming, kind of shifting who you are, what you believe in, to fit in with a group of people. And yeah, along with that, comes individuality rather than conformity. So again, expressionism. This is Knoblauch explains that it's tolerated because it doesn't challenge political nor economic interests. Because it's not seen as a threat, schools kind of are obliged to acknowledge it because there's a lot of, he explains, a lot of outside pressure to acknowledge it. So they do so knowing that expressionism, or the individual's ability to express his or herself, isn't really isn't a threat to any political or economic structures. And Knoblauch talks about the capitalist economic structure. And then this quote I thought was important: the long hallowed American myth of expressive freedom, which is on page 5, about line 149. The long hallowed American myth of expressive freedom. So kind of the myth that in America everyone is allowed to express themselves. When really he's kind of getting back to this the cultural literacy, how that one dominant culture kind of masks everything. And yes, I talked about schools are obliged to acknowledge them, or to acknowledge this type of literacy. And he says nothing important is going to change, and that's why schools will acknowledge it, or that's why he explains schools will acknowledge it, because nothing important is going to change, because again, it's not a threat to any political or economic structures. Cool, so the last one, critical literacy. And Knoblauch explains that it's more of an oppositional culture, more of kind of a not as, I guess, broadly acknowledged culture. And he talks about, let's see the quote, he talks about the critical consciousness of the social conditions in which people find themselves. Actually, that goes from the bottom of page 6 to the top of page 7, like line 182 to 183. Its agenda is to identify reading and writing abilities with a critical consciousness of the social conditions in which people find themselves. Which, so he's talking about being able to recognize the conditions, and being able to kind of step back and step out of your life, and being like, okay, these are kind of the conditions that I live in, or that we live in, and a critical consciousness. So consciousness and awareness of it, but critical, again, being able to, not critical like when your parents scold you for not cleaning your room, but critical in the sense that you're able to look at it and look at strengths and weaknesses and kind of break it down. And then the ability to challenge authority or status quo. Advocates of critical literacy see it as the ability to challenge authority and the status quo. So the way that things are going, kind of step back again and look at hey, why is this or that happening? And the individual empowerment can lead to social change. So the empowerment of the individual, or yeah, if that individual is able to step back and kind of look at everything, to be able to step back and look at everything and kind of identify weaknesses or wrongdoings in the way that in the social conditions, and to make social change. So that a lot of like movements you see that criticize either the government or somebody of a position of power, a structure, and want to lead to social change. I always think of the civil rights movement, like stepping back. Hey, we think this is wrong. Let's do something about it. So I wrote considered dangerous because it's again a threat to that dominant culture, or those who are in power, because those who are in power typically want things to keep going the way things are, or the status quo, keep the status quo, maintain it, because they obviously benefit from it. They're in power, and those who are not typically want change. So that's kind of the dynamic you see there. And then kind of this last note that being literate isn't enough. That being literate only allows individuals, as he says, to enter the arena in which power is contested. Or I think he says entrance into the arena in which power is contested, like line 189. That kind of runs 186 to, I guess, 192, that quote there. The belief that the ability to speak alone enables entrance to the arena in which power is contested. Cool. And keeping going from there, at stake from this point of view is in principle the eventual reconstituting or restructuring or redefining of the class structure of American life, specifically a change of those capitalist economic practices that assist the dominance of particular groups. So again, the dominance of particular groups, those who want to stay in power versus those who want change. So that's kind of all I have for you. These are, remember, the 4 categories. I talked about 3 of them because we talked about one pretty in depth in class. The 4 categories that Knoblauch gives of literacy. Again, just worth noting maybe that it's published in 1990, so a year before I was born. Some of you were, I think, still 4 or 5 years away from that. Yeah, published in 1990, but I think a lot of it still holds true today. So it's kind of interesting. And then, what do I want from you? Your homework, I know it's Friday night, don't worry about it tonight, but over the weekend, I'll post this too in an announcement, but over the weekend, read and annotate your essays that you chose. Javier's group, I sent you guys a message. You'll have to switch from hooks, bell hooks, to, I think, Edmondson. Reply to me as soon as you can, so I know you're doing the right one. But read and annotate the essays, and a step up or a step ahead would be to get with your groups and start talking about it. While you're reading and annotating your essays, remember critically reading, actively reading, make an outline. I think that, just from the discussion today, I think that helps out a lot. And then so I'm going to have you do one more assignment in a discussion post. You won't be able to see replies until you post. But which one of these categories does Knoblauch agree with or advocate for, if any? Does he not advocate for any of them? Does he advocate for one over the other? So identify that, and then I'd like you to apply one of these categories of literacy to a real life situation or example, and it doesn't have to be personal. It can be something in the world or something in history. It doesn't really matter. I just want to see kind of that application. So yeah, other than that, have a great weekend. I'll be posting more videos. I'm making them all tonight. So anyway, have a good one. Be well.